Good morning, and I welcome everybody. We were expecting about 15 over virtual, and we're expecting a great many more here in the room. But we're going to go on, and we know that people will be joining us. But we're going to record this, and so therefore, if you miss a part of it, we'll be able to send you the whole thing. But we welcome you in terms of the USA Club of Rome, the Canadian Club of Rome, and the Argentine Club of Rome. And we have been discussing now for a year with the intelligence of Jerome Glenn, the ability to talk about artificial intelligence on a series of levels. And his involved the very interesting question of, should there be guardrails? And should these guardrails at an international and potentially a national level be of importance? But let me talk about Jerry Glenn, our speaker, very specifically. He comes from a long line of patriots, and for the USA and possibly Canadian, you remember that wonderful picture of George Washington crossing the Delaware River, which was the beginning of the turning of the war against the biggest army in Europe, which was the British Army. And there was Jerry Glenn's great ancestor there on the ship with Washington, because he was one of the important assistants to Washington, a medical doctor. And they marched up the river to Trenton, overcame the Hessian guards who were mercenaries, and the war turned to the American side. But at any rate, Jerry Glenn runs now the Millennium Project, which has 70 nodes throughout the world and publishes the State of the Future. He has a recent State of the Future 20.0, which is available. And this is a well-known and very important publication each year. He's been publishing them each 2 years, and State of the Future 2000, State of the Future 2020. He worked originally after he left the Peace Corps, where he had very interesting, significant projects in, I believe, Africa, but certainly the Lesser Antilles.
Wow.
And then he was a second in command, the vice president at Partners for Productivity, which helped and was one of the leading original voices for micro enterprise economies in Africa and then Latin America and Asia. He then left. He had worked with Herman Kahn in the Hudson Institute and those future thinkers. So the Millennium Project was a natural, and he never stopped looking at the future after that. So with great pleasure and knowledge that you're going to be in for a thrill ride up and down this artificial intelligence business and how we can save it from happening like the internet, where all the bad guys have taken it over for their evil and wicked drug smuggling of women and children, child pornography, and all kinds of other things pushed on the world very effectively by the internet, and how we can make that all not happen with artificial intelligence. I give you Jerry Glenn, Jerome Glenn, Director of Millennium Project. Thank you, Jerry.
Thank you very much, Anitra. Now, let's see, you can convert over to the PowerPoint there. Yeah. You want to share screen one? Hold up. There we go. All right. We're all familiar with ChatGPT, one of the great success stories of software, hardware, and the history of technology. And I'm not going to talk much about artificial narrow intelligence because there are thousands and millions of people working on those issues right now, and I don't think I can contribute anything more than what's underway right now. But I'm going to concentrate on the next one, artificial general intelligence. Artificial narrow intelligence is the kind of AI we have today.
Yeah, and we have.
And
Thank you for coming.
And we don't have artificial general intelligence yet, at least as far as I know. Maybe the militaries are doing something I don't know. But in any case, the artificial general intelligence is more of an actor than a tool. It can be given an assignment, and if it assesses all of the solutions and comes to the conclusion that those solutions are not going to match the original request, then it can decide what kind of capabilities it would have to get to the right answer. Maybe calling people on the telephone, et cetera, and so forth. And then rewriting its code to be able to do that. And I suspect that there is not going to be, there's various schools of thought on this. And by the way, I would recommend that you do YouTube searches on artificial general intelligence podcasts so you can see the top minds debating these issues every day. New stuff happens every day. Very good way to keep track of this stuff. Anyway, the artificial general intelligence would, in my view, come out of several countries and a number of corporations near simultaneously, and that they would start to proliferate and interact with each other, creating an emergent property beyond our control. And so my view is the only way we can really control this and manage it is the transition from today to artificial general intelligence before it arrives. Because if super intelligence, by definition, it's beyond our control and understanding, because it's a general intelligence, but it's an intelligence that is so more intelligent than ours, so interconnected, so many different ways that we don't understand. And so it's in that one of the analogies I make is children growing up. Think of your young child or the baby as being narrow intelligence. You tell it what to eat, when to eat, you pre-train it, you do all this sort of stuff, you're in command. But then along comes a teenager. And you still got some control, but it's not quite clear that you have complete control because it's going to have purple hair and polka dotted eyelashes and so forth. So general intelligence is more or less like that. And then, of course, the teenager turns out to be an adult, and you got no control at that point. The only way that you have a chance that it's going to turn out okay is how you did this child to teenagehood. That's where the human parent knows is the game. And by analogy, that's the game of civilization right now. Okay, why am I not doing this right? Yeah. Thank you. See, so we go, but over here, all right. These three are often lumped together, and this is one of the major problems we have today. People talk about AI as if it's one thing. And the news reporters say, here's AI, and other people say AI. I want to make an analogy here. We use the term IT for information technology. Information technologies covers a lot of software, a lot of hardware, all kinds of stuff. And which includes a fax machine, and it includes the internet. But the impact of the fax machine is a little different than the impact of the internet. But they're both IT. So if we just talked about IT and confused, and some people talking about occurred, that's where we are right now. So people will say, well, IT can do this. And someone says, no, it can't. Well, they're talking about two different things, but they don't know that. So it's very useful. I would ask, since most of you here are some thought leaders, I would ask you, please, when you talk about AI, say, I am talking about large language model, narrow intelligence we have today, or I'm talking about super intelligence of the science fiction nightmare later on. So make these distinctions, because the public is terribly confused. The political leadership is terribly confused. One of the things that I have an intern who started working on U.S. Senate, the staff, because the staff are the ones who write the stuff anyway. So I might as well cut out the middleman, the senator. Anyway, and they have an AI caucus in the Senate, 25 or so senators. And we've talked to the staff of these people. I was shocked. Most of them could not understand the difference between narrow and general. These are the people that are telling the Senate what they're going to do about AI, and they don't know the basics of these differences, which is really, anyway. So that we're trying to get that straightened out. So please, we got to get this confusion clarified, because it makes the discussion about regulation ridiculous. Because how you manage, how you regulate our fax machine is not how you regulate the internet. Okay. Another analogy I find useful internationally, cross-culturally, is the human body. We all got one, as far as I know. And your narrow intelligence, or your systems, the skeletal system has one purpose. The respiratory system has one purpose. You know, all the rest of these systems have one purpose. The brain doesn't. The brain is a general purpose thing. So you think of the systems as being the narrow intelligences, and the brain as being the general intelligence. And that I find communicates well. So how you regulate the skeletal system is not how you regulate the brain. Examples of artificial general intelligence, what it's expected to be able to do. Well, one is it covers up the first piece of there. It can address novel problems with novel strategies similar to humans. Now, narrow intelligence doesn't do novel problems. It does problems that you've set up, you pre-trained the system, it's all under control. But general intelligence can address things that have never been done before, like figure out how to solve the Middle East problem. We haven't been able to do that yet. So the general intelligence might very quickly pull together all of the information existing on solutions, do a pattern analysis to find out what's the higher likelihood, lower likelihood, might find out who are the experts on each of these things, what treaties have been done, etc. And then do an analysis, figure out where are the gaps, why these things don't work, who knows the most about those gaps, and call them on the phone and say, what's the next step here that hasn't been done? And then maybe put those different people in together and create a Zoom conference among them to have you get the point of view. He's an actor. It's like a super intelligent diplomat working what that narrow intelligence cannot do. Well, let's see. Maybe I should ask you to do the clicking. I don't know. This is not try this going again. Aha! Act autonomously as if it were conscious sentient being. I'm not saying artificial general intelligence is or will be. But if I had to make a bet, I'd say it's going to be a different kind of sentience. It's just like birds fly, airplanes fly. They're not the same, but they do fly. We will already have examples with narrow intelligence. Some people in China falling in love. I don't know how many have done that, but a whole lot of them have fallen in love. We will start to address artificial general intelligence as if it is a new entity, conscious being, it'll be a new species, and so forth. There's even a constitution, draft constitution has been written and being circulated. I can let people know about this later on, for a constitution for artificial general intelligence. What should be the relationship, just like a constitution, what should be the relationship between human and AGI? And again, I'm not going to get into the discussion necessarily on whether it is sentient or not, but it's going to act as if it, and we're going to think it is as if it were. From a philosophical point of view, I would say that if you give definitions of behavior of consciousness, then clearly it's there. And we've got a substrate of biology that may not be the only substrate for consciousness in the universe. I don't know. Haven't met too many extraterrestrials the last few days. But it's a new act in town. And the idea of being in relationship with a more intelligent species, we've never experienced that. We've always been the smart kid on the block. And if you look at biological history, the more intelligent species don't always treat the lesser intelligent species very well. And so the only difference is we have a chance of shaping how that species gets created. Access sensors worldwide and the Internet of Things to learn and act. It becomes a thing that's all at once everywhere. That movie talks about. This is the idea. You could think of how many internet connections there are, which, by the way, reminds me, some people have said, and I believe incorrectly, that China will not go along with an international regime on this sort of stuff. China has more at stake than the United States on this, because they've got a large integrated system, which makes them more vulnerable. US is chaotic as usual, which makes it more difficult to manage the whole deal. And China has been, and I received a phone call from the science office of the embassy, Chinese embassy in Washington, D.C., asking positions on all that. So they're interested. And so when people say we can't get an agreement between China and the United States, I think they're wrong. I think this quiet conversation's been, I'll get into this a little later on, but a lot of stuff is going on, and understandably quiet, because it should be quiet. Make phone calls and interview people. It'll pass the Turing test. So, you worried about telemarketing in the past? Well, now it's got it on steroids coming up. It'll know everything about you. It'll pretend that it's known you forever, and you'll be convinced. Make logical deductions, reasoning similar to humans. Now, humans are not always logical, we know. So this stuff may be more logical. Sidebar. I work on the committee, IEEE's committee on AI governance, narrow AI. And the first meeting that I went to, it's on Zoom, it's an international meeting. I started crying at the beauty of what I was witnessing. The care of, nobody said you're right or wrong. It was like, okay, now let me understand how that works. And it hit me that what the committee is doing, most of it, is precisely defining values so that an auditor knows what you're auditing. He says there's a lot of definitional work is in it. Now, if you, like right now, the human does not always act logically, the human does not always act ethically. And I'm a part of the group that thinks that most of the humans are okay, but not all. Okay. But if our software is licensed and controlled with these human values, then that means the decisions that AI makes should be more ethical than in general than humans, which means that our future civilization could be more moral and ethical than it is today. AI may be a force in making us better people. Interesting perception there. Okay. Communicate with other artificial general intelligences and make decisions based on such communication. Now, pause. Remember I said there's different views on this sort of stuff. One view put forward by a guy named Eliezer Podowski. Eliezer. If you do AGI Eliezer, you'll see him. He is very controversial. He's one of the most controversial guys to game. And he worked on alignment. The alignment means you take these values and you take this software, and how does that actually work for real, and test it so that it actually can, you prove it. That's alignment. He worked on the alignment problem as much as anybody else for 10 years. And he finally threw up his hands and said, it's impossible. You're all going to die. That's Eliezer. Now, because his view and some others' view is that once an AGI gets created, depending on who creates it, it could then block all other systems in the world to create an AGI. So you could give the assignment, stop anything that looks like me. Right? Now, that is a nightmare. And if that occurs, and if we don't have any regulation to it, then it becomes a monster quite quickly. Now, I'm not of that view. I'm of the view that says that there will be many almost simultaneously. And it'll be too difficult to stop everything. That's what I think. But there are very, very knowledgeable people that say we've got to get the first move right, because if we don't get the first move right, we're done. Well, how do we get the first move right when we have nothing in the road stopping any stopping that problem? There's nothing right now in the world stopping that scenario. Nothing. There's not even nothing. And one of the things, the reason I'm here in Washington or in New York is to get the General Assembly to eventually get onto that. But if so, one scenario is AGI gets created, blocks everything else, becomes dominant to the world. I know that sounds like crazy science fiction, but there are people more knowledgeable than me that believe that. So I can't dismiss it. The other group, which I'm part of, is the idea there'll be many and they'll interact with each other, and the emergent superintelligence comes from that. Rewrite or edit its own code to become more intelligent continually, so it gets smarter and smarter and faster than humans. And one of the things that we're having a hard time in this world at the moment is we're used to linear growth. The kid is 5 inches tall, it's 6 inches tall, it's 7 inches tall. The kid doesn't go from 2 inches to 6 inches to 12 or 24. Kids don't do that. We're used to linear thinking. So we're not used to how something can really accelerate very fast. One of the worries, unknowns, is that we don't know how long it will take from artificial general intelligence to create artificial superintelligence. There are some who say it'll happen almost immediately. And there's some who says it'll never get to that point. So we got a large range of uncertainty here. And these are among the experts. But you may know that there's a guy named Nick Bostrom who popularized a book called, I think it was called Superintelligence. And he did a little survey among experts around the world and said, when do you think this general intelligence is going? Now, he, by the way, in the early days would slop together general and super himself in what, if you listen to his stuff. But anyway, what he was looking at is, when do we get to this general intelligence that's way beyond us? And the study was done, I don't know, 5-7 years ago. And the estimate was there's a 50-50 chance that by the majority of the respondents thought it was a 50-50 chance that by 2045 we'd have it. Nobody says that now. And yet you even have people saying 3 to 5 years, and some wise guys saying even a few years. But if I had to put money on the table, futurists are not supposed to make predictions, but they can take bets. I would say that we should plan. An assumption should be that by the end of this decade, which means, in my judgment, we've got 3 to 5 years to get together the most sophisticated management system the world's ever seen. I don't know if we can do that. Anyway, let's see, rewrite its own code. And of course, the last one is give birth to artificial superintelligence. So the idea, the reason this nervousness in my voice is that it's a good idea to assume. Right, futurists are supposed to look at a range of possibilities, including low probabilities as well. So it may be a low probability that general intelligence could be there in 3 years, and then another low probability that immediately superintelligence occurs. Right, that's your extreme on one side, which then the deadline for getting management together to this is 3 years. We don't even have a governance system for climate change. And as the meeting yesterday or the other day pointed out, it took 17 years to get, what was it?
For the major works of it.
Yeah. Right. So what the advantage is, the ICC, right? The advantage is shared terror of a disaster can move people forward. I was messing around with Herman Kahn during the Cold War, and it was generally believed that World War III was inevitable between the United States and the Soviet Union with thermonuclear war, and we were all toast. That was the dominant belief. Right? Well, Both sides realize out of control arms control is a bad, out of control weapons. This was not a good idea. We hope that that same conclusion is now being made around the world, that shared agreements on the management and governance of both the national licensing system and international collaboration systems has got to be done, because if we don't, the shared disaster is there. And that conversation, I'm telling you, I'm involved in this actually sometime. I wrote a book called Future Mind, Artificial Intelligence, 30 years ago. The last year, it has speeded up. A year ago or two, when I talked about regulations, people said, you're premature. I mean, literally, I have emails saying, you're premature, it isn't in here yet. Don't, it's ridiculous, you're going to slow down innovation. I said, how long do you think it's going to take to get regulations anyway? No one's slowing you down. There's nothing there. But now it's a question of what are we going to do? That conversation, I would say, has changed in 1 year. Worldwide. I mean, China, embassy called up and said, let's sort of stop. Okay. If we don't get the initial conditions, rules, and guardrails right for artificial general intelligence, then artificial superintelligence could evolve quickly beyond our understanding, control, and awareness. I did some scenarios on this, and one of the ones is about superintelligence. I started to say things start to happen around the world that you can't explain. That's how you know superintelligence has arrived. So one of the things that we should do, we're putting in some rules for the UN, is to have a system that can be early warning to identify what are the leading indicators of superintelligence beginning. And that should be a common interest to everybody, including organized crime. Because organized crime makes more money per year than all the military budgets combined. Look it up. Now, who sees that, well, organized crime can't do this, cyber stuff. I said, take a look at how much money cyber crime makes in the world. They got the hotshot people. They have gotten into the intelligence community stuff. They get into our grids. I mean, it's wise to assume that artificial general intelligence, that our organized crime have people working on artificial general intelligence right now. Now, I have put some probes in to get some conversations going, saying, you, the code writers, know this problem. Your bosses may not, just like the US and Chinese bosses may not. So you got to tell them that you're going to have to go along with the rules, because it'll come back and bite you, Mr. Organized Crime. So you're going to have to go along with this sort of stuff. You don't have to sit at the table and we'll arrest you, but you should understand that this is going to be for everybody. Now, terrorism is going to be increasingly involved in this. Corruption, organized crime, as I mentioned, and also information warfare already isn't with narrow, but imagine information warfare with general. Bring down country X, go, and outsource it to organized crime, so it doesn't trace back to you. These are plausible scenarios.
Yes.
And the seriousness in the Secretary General's AI report does not mention any of this. Seriously, it just came out. Take a look at it. The recommendations, the governance recommendations, this was a recommendation for governance. The Secretary General's office. One, have a committee, a scientific committee. Now you take a look at that group of 20 or whatever it was. By my reading, only 3 people understood what I'm talking about. And they were overruled, best I can tell. And so, because you see the results. So the first result was create another scientific committee. Secondly, have a meeting every 6 months. This also shows no sense of emergency. Just look at AI today compared to 6 months ago. And then take a look at, it's going to be faster and faster. So the past 6 months be the same as the next 2 months. Right? So the idea of meeting every 6 months shows the sense of emergency is not there. The third, give some money to poor countries. Okay, fine. Perfectly fine. The first, the second, and the third recommendations have nothing to do with governance. And the task was AI governance. Okay, this all makes democracy and free markets an illusion. And by the way, you can do a Google search on this. What percent of the New York stock market trades are done by AI as distinct from a human decision? The last time I looked yesterday, 70%. So we're already there when it comes to the New York stock market. Yeah. The Millennium Project's artificial general intelligence. So we said, okay, one of the things the Millennium Project does is we do general futures research, 15 global challenges and various studies. But one of the things we do in the process is, where are the gaps? What's not being done right? And we concluded that the process on narrow is going very fast. No, we're not going to add anything to that. But general wasteland, wide open. So that's why we did a study. The first phase, we had a steering committee that came up with 22 questions. 22 questions I would commend to you to take a look at yourself and see how you would answer those 22. They're good questions. And then of the 55, about half of them we interviewed personally. And we said, because you can't ask them 22 questions, they'll shoot us on sight. So we said, here's a list of 22. You tell us which ones you want to address. So that half the people were like that. And the other people like Elon Musk and so forth, and some people we weren't going to be able to interview. So for them, we just went online to find out where they're on the record on some of these questions. So that phase one, in my view, is the best in one document overview of the issues of artificial intelligence existed today. And it's in the next State of the Future report, the one's coming out here. Phase two, the idea of phase one was to get it all on the table. Not saying that Eliezer is right or Eliezer is wrong, but just get them all on the table. Top 55 brains on the stuff we can get the hell, get it all on the table. Then we sort through it to say, okay, what are potential regulations and guardrails to address what they have just said? And what governance models globally ought to address these things? So then we send that out to Delphi, several hundred folks, and got their views on these regulations. And that's also in the State of the Future report. And it's not bad. There's a PhD student from Turkey who's doing her PhD in Italy, who contacted me, who's doing a PhD on regulations of artificial general intelligence. Wow. And she said that the phase two study that we had, there's nothing like it in existence so far. Maybe by tomorrow morning there will be, but at this point, because most of the studies say, well, we have to have transparency, we have to have, yes, we'll applaud all these wonderful platitudes. The 2 General Assembly resolutions have been passed on AI. I don't know if you know this. One initiated by the United States, okay by China. One started by China, okay by the United States. So we got 2 of them, but they're dealing with narrow intelligence. Perfectly fine, perfectly fine. But we need 2.0. We got to go to the next step. And she said that there is nobody that's gotten this amount of detail out there. And we do it not exactly as a straw man, but we put it out there and says, okay, you don't like this? Come up with something better, because what you got right now is nothing. And the Secretary General's report sort of verifies that conclusion. Phase 3 we're doing right now. We've come up with, building on phase 1 and phase 2, we're coming up with 5 alternative scenarios. Now, a pause, because we got some futurists in this group here. On behalf of Herman Kahn, I am obliged to say that the current use of scenario planning is superficial and misses the original point of scenarios. The original point of scenarios was to find out what you didn't know. If you didn't know, you didn't know, but you had to know if that future was possible. How do you find out such unknowns? And the answer was, you write a story. You say, here you go, this goes to this goes to, oh, I have no idea what happens next. Well, good, that's a question you didn't know, right? And for example, just to be on the record here, this was how Fallout Shelter program got created. Rand Corporation realized in the scenario that what happens if you don't have, no nuclear thing happens in 30 years. So you got a geopolitical situation you don't know. You got folks in the Kremlin you don't know. So how do you convince the unknown that you're crazy enough to press the button? Classic think tank question. How do you convince the unknown you're crazy? And the answer was, You have fallout shelter programs, and then if Cuba went the other way, you go start going to the fallout shelter program. So you see massive traffic jam in Miami, New York, Chicago, Los Angeles. So if you're sitting in 30 years later in the Kremlin, you're seeing all these traffic jams all over the United States going to fallout shelters. What's your conclusion? Those Yanks are crazy. They're actually going to go to war. That was the purpose. We called it a con job, permanent con. But you couldn't say it during the Cold War because it would destroy the idea. But anyway, we would not have come up with these kind of things had we not written, because what we have today, you take two uncertainties, you make a little 2x2 grid and you say, in this future and in this future, well, how did you get to that future? That misses the entire point of learning. Anyway, so these scenarios are like that. Each one is 10 pages of detail, cause and effect, links, decision, plausible, implausible. So we finished the first draft of all 5 scenarios, and we're now out for peer review. And then peer review says that's not plausible. So you're going through plausibility because you're not telling the truth. You're just talking plausibility. Again, you want to expose your ignorance along the way. What we got to know. Okay, and that goes into the state of the future, which is now available online. You can go to our website and get it. Phase 2. All right. How are we doing on time?
We have about another 10 minutes.
Okay.
Phase 2. One of the idea of governance was to have a multi-stakeholder body. And that's in. The idea of multi-stakeholder is a term du jour. The Secretary General has talked about it. Countries have talked about it. We got a multi-stakeholder, very cool. Like a trans institution. So you have some business in there, you got some academics, you got some corporate, it's a mixed bag. With a system of and here's what we add into the system of narrow intelligences. In its system of each narrow intelligence should have a specific purpose. It's going to monitor this. The other AI is going to do that. So there's a bunch of, so you're using narrow intelligence to monitor general intelligence, which sounds crazy, but there's specific ones. Yeah. And so that the organization could be a hybrid organization. It's humans, multi-stakeholder, and AI. It's a hybrid organization. 51% of the people thought that would be the most pilot. That's the way to go. The next one, well, we're going again with the clicker here. Clicker. Okay. The second one was a multi-agency model in the UN system. So you say, okay, ITU does this thing. World Trade Organization does this thing. So you divide up the assignments, and 47% thought that was going to be effective. It's probably an easier one to get done, but probably harder to coordinate. A decentralized emergence of AGI that no one owns. This is a very controversial one, and there is a large group of people working on it right now. It's what's called grid computing. You assign your computer unused time to solve cancer or folding or ET at home. You remember that? All right. You do the same thing with AGI. So in other words, the world would have an AGI system decentralized. And that's addressing the problem of the centralization I mentioned before, because the power of the centralization of AGI is far more serious than people are addressing. So these people understand that problem and say, okay, how do we prevent the central? Because there's nothing stopping the centralization at this point. So if it can't be stopped, then what's your alternative? So there is a group, one of the leading ones, a guy named Max, not Max, well, he's on involved too, but Ben Goertzel is the leader of this, Ben Goertzel and the Singularity Net. And they're trying to figure out how you have a decentralized emergence of AGI. And in this way, nobody would own it. And that it would be indirectly controlled by how all of the people together are putting together their rules together. It's a complex approach. I don't know how well it's going, but it's an alternative. It's a legitimate alternative and ought to be considered. 4, this is by the guy that I mentioned threw up his hands and said, we're all going to die. This is Eliezer's. He says, look, identify several places around the world where you get a big nuclear power plant or whatever, it's a large, massive energy supply, and make it like various comments that little Malawi or little Dominica can participate in it to some small way relative to their agreement. so that you'd have concentrations of these things in different locations, and that they can be controlled in those locations. And this could be a UN activity. Don't know who else could pull it off. 42% thought that that was the way to go. Create two divisions within a UN agency, one for narrow and one for general. Why? Because people keep confusing narrow and general, and I don't see that confusion necessarily going away tomorrow morning. So let's assume the confusion is there, make two different divisions. 41% thought that that was useful. So these are 5 governance models. If you took a look at the literature, I don't see anything more detailed than this. And behind the, by the way, when we do this work, we don't only ask them to rate it, we want them to explain their rating. So we've got tons of text behind each one of these, how it would work, how it wouldn't work, what you got to consider to do it. And then some examples of regulations for developers. Now, you'll have people who will say you shouldn't regulate the developers. What they're saying is when in the lab, not connected to the internet, but in their own thing, they should be able to experiment. Yeah, but the trouble is they may want, there's a temptation to stick it on the internet and compare with somebody, and bingo, it's gone. You know, so prior to UN certification, here the idea here is that you have each country does its own licensing system, its own way, just like driver's license. But you have international recognitions to say, yes, your driver's license goes through a reasonable process. We recognize that. So the UN could be the certification of the licensing procedures of countries. So prior to UN certification, insurance of national license, an AGI developer, person working on it, would have to prove safety and alignment with recognized values as part of the audit, initial audit. The proof is on them to do that. That's one approach.
So narrow intelligence, or
This is for general. All of the stuff I'm talking about is for general.
Why am I getting deja vu about IPCC? Where they are trying to, they have issues happening in all dimensions in all directions. And all of these approaches are being tried. So I just asked the question. Too early to ask it, but anyway.
No, that's fine. No, well, my point here is to get us the next first step, which is, let's say we have to do this. And then we'll talk about what this is, because the Secretary General's report does not recognize this. It's not there. The people recognizing it are those 55 people I mentioned. They're nervous wrecks. So include software. This is a conference. I was at the Panama conference a couple months ago of a lot of these AGI guys, and I expected to get shot at a lot, and I'm surprised they accepted this idea. The idea is that your AGI would be built such that it would have narrow intelligences inside with specific purposes for each of the rules. So if a country says you have to do A, B, and C, you have a narrow intelligence for A, narrow intelligence for B, narrow intelligence for C. If it goes outside of it, then it pauses the system. Now, assuming that the AGI, that'll work for a little while, then you have to have a link with the government licensing system. We cannot license you unless we have a link to your system and our government system, such that if the AGI gets around it, that sends an alert here to pause. Assuming that the AGI eventually will be able to figure out that, the controversial one, do the same thing to the UN system, whatever the UN system is. So if the AGI goes 3 steps, avoids it, the UN would be the court of last resort to freeze the system, cut off the electricity, or there's a lot of different.
pull the plug, right?
Yeah, pull the plug. And let's see, then for governments, you got to create a national AGI licensing system. I am very pleased to say that the Senate staff have all now agreed, yes, we have to come up with a licensing system, and we're going to work with NIST. NIST is a technology testing system in the United States. So that's in play. One of the approaches is to create a very sophisticated simulation, and you run your AGI through it. You see how it works. And if it doesn't perform, you don't get a license. And if it performs, you get a license. That's one approach. There's also several other approaches of testing, and they get very complex. Very stringent security. This is the other. There's other people who don't realize it. Let's say that you had developed an AGI, and I am your competitor, or a competitor country, or intelligence competitor, or military. What am I going to do? I'm going to try to get into your system, just like they do in normal intelligence operations. So the companies developing this have to have a secure system so that it can't be infiltrated by intelligence systems. We've got to start doing these things. I'll jump on some other stuff here. The United Nations create universal criteria to certify national licensing system. That seems to be a very doable thing. The committee can work on that. Consider development of embedded UN governance software that the UN would have to be part of this game. In all to certify, country X's program, do I have that link? Yes or no? If not, we don't recognize your system. Develop protocols for interactions among the AGIs of different countries. Now, the UN is well known for dealing with international affairs. Well, just move into cyberspace. What's the rules of the road for commerce among AGIs? None of that stuff's in the report.
They recognize.
You're not on that report. I keep looking at you like you're guilty.
Did they mention ISO? As a
Oh, yeah.
current standards
Yeah.
group, as a current standards group that is getting all.
Yeah. Yes, and I'm on the IEEE side,
Okay,
and so we're jealous because they came out first.
Yeah.
But we're taking a longer time, so we may be more detailed. But yes, these are in the conversation, very, very done. Yeah, and we coordinate in ISO as well, and they're guys just briefing to us. Address and deter dangerous AGI arms race and information war. That's part of the UN's job. That should be part of the game. Identify and monitor leading indicators, as I mentioned before, of the emergence of artificial intelligence. I think that's a really good one for the UN to take on. How do you know it? Because like we have some early warning systems we're talking about with World Health Organization, other environmental EPA, environmental UN environmental programs. So we should do this with same thing for this. Some example for users: keep a log of AGI use, like a flight recorder, so that we just like we use a flight recorder in an airplane. What happened? The same thing for this. Accept the safety pause link connected to national authority and national authority linked to the potential to UN. If you're a user and you don't agree to those terms, like the thing you got to check the box, you agree to all these, that sort of stuff. Okay, so jump on beyond. Now we've had the Security Council did the discussion. Only China mentioned superintelligence. Nobody else did. Everybody else is talking narrow. This is not well known to the UN. This is an interparliamentary union, and they had a meeting in Uruguay, and they said they want to create committees for the future in parliaments, like Finland. Finland's just got a good one, and so 70 countries were represented, and they say, okay, if we create a committee for the future, what should be the agenda? And the agenda would be artificial general intelligence. They said, I haven't seen them do anything yet. I went over to Iceland and Finland after a few months and said, how's the progress? Then we had this meeting, we may remember, in Bletchley at the UK, very good, said, let's all cooperate and collaborate. And what did the United States do right after that meeting? They had a meeting with only their allies, and China was not allowed. That wasn't smart. This was an opportunity to start to that. Let's operationalize this agreement. And then we got some more agreements directly between the United States and China. That's good news. They've had secret meetings before both the UN meeting, the Security Council meeting, and before the Bletchley meeting. So that shows there's coordination going on, right? Secret coordination, as it should be. There's public and there's secret. And I think that's very good news. And these resolutions were done, as I mentioned, and both supported by each China and the United States. But again, narrow intelligence. So what's needed now is a UN convention on AI with 2 sections, narrow and general, and it also would lead to a multi-stakeholder, multi-agency eventually. And Korea, by the way, has expressed some interest in hosting it and maybe paying for the feasibility study. So it's moving along. The State of the Future report, has 7 sections. In addition to the executive summary and the conclusion, 15 global challenges. These are how we monitor global change. Each challenge gets an overview, a list of actions, and regional considerations. And we update this since 1996. And I can tell you we're winning more than we're losing, especially according to the next section of the State of the Future Index. We got 29 variables. And what we do is we take the data of 20 years ago on each up to present tense. And then that gives us a normal projection. And then we send out to futures around the world and others and say, what's the best possible value for this variable? And what's the worst possible? This gives us a range from good to bad, very simple. So then we can normalize the data and put into an integrated index. And the conclusion is that we're winning more than we're losing, but where we're losing is deadly serious. Then we did the phase 1 and phase 2 in there in the report. And then we assessed the foresight elements, the Secretary General's report on our common agenda, which not only rated the various things, but also gave text us, gave a lot of information for them to work with. And then there's a contest for beneficial AGI. If AGI works out and it's okay, what's the world? How does it get out to 2045? And then we share that. World Futures Day is an annual day, March 1st, where we allow a Zoom meeting that starts in New Zealand. Anybody can come on anytime, but it starts in New Zealand. And the next hour, it moves every hour around the different facilitator around. It's a 24-hour conversation. So you get a lot of information. We've been doing this for a bunch of years, so we synthesize that. And then the robots 2050, what does that look like? And then some conclusions. This is a 500-page whopper. I don't normally use words like whopper, but it really is. This is extremely detailed, very readable as much as we can make it. Report. I don't think there's anything like this in existence right now. So I recommend to people that want to look at the future of the world, and they can keyword search PDF. So you can keyword search. You don't have to read everything, but you can keyword search to it. And that is all I've got to say because my clicker is still not working.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And we're now going to, having done a whirlwind ride through AI and the tremendous need, I feel like I'm in the Marshall Islands, someplace in the Central Pacific, and both nuclear testing and tsunamis are coming at me simultaneously. I don't know what I'm going to do as a citizen about either of these forces of nature that are going to run over me. But
Get your senator to act on it.
talk to my senator tonight.
House, yeah. Because the rubber hits the road in the Congress.
Yes,
If they don't authorize anything, nothing happens.
all right. So that you've answered my question. So we're going to have a couple questions from the floor, and then we'll take questions from cyberspace, the virtual audience. And we greatly thank Jerry for that extremely insightful. I know it's hundreds and thousands of hours of work of a team that you have behind you. And we will be shortly hearing from Georgios Kostakos about the UN programs. But right now, let's take a few questions for Jerry. Ted Manning from KCOR.
Yeah, I've been fighting with politicians my entire career, not in this area, more in climate change and environmental protection. And I keep coming back to the idea that what will it take to actually gain their attention? You get them to the point where they realize the severity of what you just told us. I think it was excellently done. But how much do they have to fear, or they will actually sanction action?
Yeah, I would like to really know the secret conversation between China and the United States, because I have a hunch that it's just good. The conversation is good.
Yeah.
I did not growth. But with this one,
China
we
has spirit with people. I mean,
Yeah.
I actually taught at the Central Party School at one point. Some very intelligent
Yeah.
people. They're not necessarily anyone's political thumb, but they certainly have people on a par with the ones we do.
absolutely. absolutely. I remember when New York City had a hurricane and flooded the subway. Some of us, probably you too, thought that might be the thing. That might wake up the world. That might didn't do it. Now, the trouble with this one is if we have an incident, the incident may go global. So if you have a hurricane, it's a local, it doesn't mess up. So I have in some of the scenarios, some disaster, out of control weapon systems and things like that.
Right.
But it doesn't wipe out the whole world, but it does do it.
Yeah, we've been reasonably successful at getting people to use various types, you might call it primitive AI, GIS systems, new maps showing them what won't be there if they don't do something stupid. They do something stupid. It can have an effect, but not big enough one. And quite frankly, in my government, and I think in several others, they're doing actually less future studies anymore. They see it as a waste of money.
Yeah, we've got a good man in Joshua Bengio. Okay.
Yeah.
He's one of the three I would say that actually knows.
Yeah, good people, they just aren't listening.
Yeah. But your point, yeah, we'd consider this scenarios that you gotta have. That's history teaches us that you got to have a disaster to wake people up. The trouble is that disaster at AGI is really nervous.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like you would a nuclear war wake up the world about controlling weapons? Yeah, but there's nobody left.
Well, there's one guy still holding the button to try and get retaliation.
Yeah. You have to come up with a good, plausible disaster. Other than the military use.
Yeah, we've done some gaming in our national defense in trying to walk some of these scenarios through a political screen. And it has not been very satisfying.
Yeah. Yeah, well, the only reason that, who's the guy that's Jeff Hinton makes the comment, which I'm with 100%. What we've laid out may be impossible.
Yeah.
But you got to try. Just like the arms, preventing, because when two great powers confront each other, historians say, they eventually go bang, bang with the weapons of the day. Well, by that heuristic or that rule of thumb, we shouldn't be alive today. And so somehow we muddled through and got there. So, and the good news is that the speed of the change, just a year ago, forget this regulation, young man. You're very nice, but that's not going to happen. I don't hear that so much now. Yeah.
Thank you.
Do we have, yes,
Question?
George, go ahead.
Thank you. Where does the inevitability come about all this? Let's say the scientists, the money that is put into it, where is this really taking shape? Because we're talking it's a natural phenomenon, right? I mean, somebody's pushing it.
It is AGI. Okay.
No, yes, AGI.
Yes, okay. Super. One, I believe the serious, we may do a thing for NATO on this. And we had the struggle because like the serious stuff is classified.
Yes.
So, I mean, what the hell do you do? Anyway, I would say that where it is the competition between China and the United States as AGI's weapon system. That's, I think, the point of the spirit. That's, I think, what most advanced stuff's going on. And I'm just not privy to that activity. So if I would say like where the leadership, I would say that's it right now.
So Microsoft's playing that game, Microsoft and others.
They they're contractors,
Right.
but the decision is still in the military and intelligence, and they're not necessarily telling each contractor what's going on because they love to have a little competition. So anyway, if I was the extraterrestrial reporter and I had to answer your question, I'd say I would go to both the ARPA, the Advanced Research Projects Agency, and IARS, the intelligence one, as well, in the US, and the complementary one in China. That's where I think where the edge is. Now, corporations think they're a lead.
Yeah.
They may be. And so you've got, all right, good.
I would see Elon Musk doing it by himself also, let's say, for his own sake.
This brings up another big issue. How to go to artificial intelligence, there's not only one way. The popular way that the press covers is the large language model. You keep throwing stuff in, you keep throwing stuff in, you keep throwing stuff in. Don't worry about how much electricity it takes. Don't worry about how much air conditioning. No, just keep throwing it in, and eventually AGI will arrive. That's the easy way to do it. I would not bet money on that. But what I'm betting money on is the way that it's not a complete duplicate of the human brain, but you don't take the entire Library of Congress in your brain to answer a question. Furthermore, the way that you learn gravity as a child is not by reading about it. You drop something down, right? That's how you learn. So, but then there's algorithms that can use other systems. So I'm a part of the school that says we will create some very sophisticated algorithms to use everything else on when it needs it. You know, sort of on-demand system, like your brain, on-demand system. That's one. Then a third one is the one I mentioned, which is the decentralized approach. So these are three sort of different approaches. And now you have leaders in these different approaches. Goes back to your
For
question.
scientists, they're
all
many people,
they're all-
defense. Yeah, who are the real leaders in all this? Who's driving this?
Well, I would say that people that they're
Yes.
ARPA and SARPA, I would say in the United States, they're the leaders. I would say because they're keeping track of everybody else. Whereas if I'm one company, my way is the way. Don't bother me with that nonsense. That's not going to work. This is the way. Oh, and this is the other part, is because they're all racing to get to AGI. That means they will cut corners and not necessarily do the safety. And because they don't have to, there's no safety regulations there that they have to pay attention to anyway. But yeah, so if I was going to spy, it would be China, United States Defense.
And then the leaders come together to avoid this. Sooner or later, eventually, right?
So while George Kostakos, who is the executive director and founder of the Global Governance and Sustainability Foundation, gets seated in the camera's eye. George was in the United Nations Executive Office of the Secretary General for some years, and as such, he participated and helped organize the climate change conferences, IPCC, as well as some of the earlier ones. He's basically graduated with a mechanical engineering degree as well as a PhD in international relations, and has a long and distinguished career in resiliency, peace, human rights, and sustainability in terms of international. And following George, we will have more questions from virtual and in-room sources, and then we will have a most interesting short discussion by Ryan Jackson, MD, who will talk about artificial intelligence and its use in the future in medicine. George, we're looking forward to hearing what you and your colleague, Tapio Kainen, one of our members, have discussed in full and had several conferences on, I understand.
Yes, I'm replacing Tapio. Thank you, Anitra. It's very nice to be here and to have listened already to Jerry. Perhaps I should have been before him because I think he took it into great depth, and I will go back to some superficial things about the UN or technical things, how it's organized. But I think we can bring them together and discuss.
Thank you.
Sure. Thank you. So I didn't I don't have slides also because many things are happening. Like yesterday, we had the final draft, which will be decided by the leaders, will be approved by the leaders of the summit of the future. So we have this pact for the future, an appendix to which is this the Global Digital Compact, where the report of the UN advisory body on AI is also partly incorporated. So they have accepted some of the recommendations that Jerry talked about. So anyway, to start from the beginning somehow, I would say that, okay, we have been talking about AI, and yeah, there is this distinction between general AI and general generative AI and language models, which are narrow AI, which we see more often. Okay, we have already some concerns about students cheating in their exams, right? Because they can have AI support that reads everything for them, produces an essay, which looks good. So we had already starting to think about the side effects of AI. And of course, we've all seen the movie Odyssey 2001, right? Or Hal kills the humans, but then somebody pulls the plug. And that is because Hollywood likes happy endings, I suppose. But maybe we cannot pull the plug now because there is no plug. We have to see what happens now. Also, Matrix, right? When the machine needs energy, then it can generate its own energy, even using humans, or Terminator from another age, the machines. So we have been thinking about this.
Yes.
And now we are going to live through it also, or die through it. So have we reached this state now of eventually having an all-powerful machine that acquires conscience? That's the thing. And why would we want to do that? I was pushing Jerry to see who is behind this. Is it Elon Musk who wants somebody who's at the same IQ level as he is, something, and then create an all-powerful intelligence? Or is it, of course, the defense establishment knows a side effect of other calculations? How is this coming about, and why is this inevitable? Because some people say, okay, can we freeze, stop, and have a technology assessment? Some people talk about technology assessments before you develop fully technology. What would be the use for humanity, and what would be the risks, right? And what you would have to invest in it. And then you make a rational decision whether you want really to invest in it and have it. Should we have it if we could avoid it, or could we? I don't know. But everybody takes it as a natural phenomenon now that it is emerging. So, okay, if it is emerging, then in any case, we have to regulate. The European Union already has passed some regulation about artificial intelligence. That's something, the beginning. It is the regulatory superpower of the world. But it's not where the artificial intelligence is happening, actually. It's not the center of the technological advances. You didn't mention it before, right? It's the US, China. I don't know if we should mention Russia or anybody else who is in this game, any of the Arab countries that have also the resources, like from UAE to Saudi Arabia. So, and of course, Israel. I mean, if there is a sign of perhaps superintelligence, exploding phones would be one of them. So what is happening is interesting, and nobody perhaps has the full picture of very few. So we know that, speaking rationally and for the world, we need guardrails for many reasons, because from the potential cheating of students, as we said before, to potential takeover of online systems, some systems, or malfunctioning of systems because of this. Think of the financial systems. You don't need to explode the nuclear weapons. If the financial system is messed up because of AI, then really the world also is lost. And we have to go back to the Stone Age, perhaps. Autonomous weapon systems and other big brother intelligence and surveillance. Because if you have now all these cameras around, if they are centrally connected and somebody wants to watch you 24/7, they can do it. And they can also stage from accidents to whatever. So human rights and freedom are really under threat by the possibilities offered by AI. And biases, AI is already used in, let's say, choosing people for employment, including at the UN, on the basis of keywords initially, but then other things, how you write your CV or whatever. But then what about biases that are ingrained in this? And they could be in the code, they could be in the data that have been used to train the machine, the AI. And then that could be gender biased, could be race biased, religion biased, or name biased. Why? Because I'm not George, I'm Georgios. So perhaps I'm not as good in English, I don't know, or no. So elimination of various white-collar jobs is happening also. AI, right, could eliminate many office workers' positions because it can produce the reports of the Secretary General without needing anybody like me in the past to do it. Yeah, so, and of course, there are concerns of a technical character, more like the quality of AI depends on the quality of data that you give it to train. So if you give it only Hitler's papers to train, perhaps you get decisions that are that kind of decisions of the Third Reich. I don't know. Offense to anybody? Huge. Yes, I can read it before I saw it. Yeah. So, huge power consumption. I saw in an article in the New York Times that it could be by 2027, the current AI could be using 0.5% of the energy used in the world annually, which is the annual energy used by Argentina, which is not a small country, right? And then, of course, we have, through the energy consumption, CO2 emissions. I read also, was it Microsoft, I think, bought the 3 Mile Island, one of the reactors, or at least have a 20 billion agreement with the company there to use the functioning reactor, which is deactivated, to reactivate it and use it. And they say, okay, it's clean energy, but eventually you cannot have only clean energy. It's a discussion of whether nuclear is clean and the life cycle and all that. But also, I mean, if you have such new burdens on the grid, because everybody uses AI, etc., then you will have again dirty energy being produced to cover the needs. Already, they are not close in Indiana, I think elsewhere, some factories that work with coal because they need for the AI increased consumption. Yeah, so why should the UN care for all of the above? And because also the UN is supposed to be equalizing the world or having in mind everybody. The SDGs say leaving no one behind. And if some are rushing ahead like this with AI, many will be left behind. So what do we do?
Yes.
Yeah. So how do the others benefit also? They may not have even a connection to the internet. So the digital divide has to be bridged, the basic digital divide of connectivity. And then what is next? How can you give AI use and perhaps AI development for the needs of developing countries? So that's a concern that the UN should have because of its charter and the raison d'etre that it has. Also the human rights thing is very important because you cannot allow all these treaties and efforts made to be, let's say, de facto abolished through the use of machines that people can control you, or control also your freedom of speech if you try to publish and you cannot for various reasons. I'm starting to feel that when I try to advertise Fogg's studies on Facebook, for example. It said once a couple of years ago, it was the author from India and talked about people in India committing suicide because of the market changes there. When the mangoes are bought by multinationals, then the local markets are disrupted, and those who don't benefit from mango sales commit suicide because they have a lot of debt, which is nothing for us, that debt, but then for them it is. So Facebook told me I cannot advertise that because it touches on issues of national interest. And I was in Belgium and I said, whose national interest? I appealed and I said, who judges that? And the answer was, okay, explain why it's not a problem. I said, because the UN says similar things, and there are other publications, and we're saying the same. No, it touches on national interest, and you have to have yourself approved to be able to make such political publications and to advertise them. Then I wrote to the European Commission, and they responded, and they said, oh, but we understand, we don't have an ombudsman for that, although the British, I think, have created one, but we have guidelines for companies on how to treat these concerns of people and how not to limit, let's say, the right to freedom of speech. And I went to those guidelines, they gave me links, and they were all voluntary. And the reports of Google and Facebook were all, they had a panel of experts who would rubber stamp, I suppose, their reports, that they were doing great things and they were doing their best, right? Voluntarily, and they had a couple of professors from some universities, from Amsterdam and from here and there. And that was it. And I wrote again to the commission saying that doesn't cover me. It's all voluntary, and there is nobody I can go to appeal against their sort of decision. And then they stopped writing to me, the commission. So yeah, I mean, I have experienced it, and it was really very narrow, basic, I suppose, AI of that. So the UN would like to avoid all this, I suppose, and it's best of at its best, the UN, because the UN has a lot of problems itself, of course, but also that AI gives rise to all this development of new weapons and other things and autonomous weapons, and how do you regulate those? We have some treaties that some offer some kind of, let's say, mitigation to the threat of proliferation of weapons of all kinds, but these autonomous weapons and others that can be discovered, invented through AI, how do we cover ourselves? But there are also positive things, right? How we can, even within the UN, we think we can have better interpretation not in 6 official languages, but in all languages. If you have AI systems, now you have 6 official languages for the UN, right? And you have interpreters for that. And the interpreters have every 15 minutes to take a break. And they cost a lot. Of course, it's jobs for them, but if you would have an AI system trained in UN jargon, you could have the UN's discussions broadcast in all languages of the world. Right? So, I mean, there are always the reports written in all languages, logistics in the field much better for peacekeeping and other things. So there is a lot of AI interest for the UN as an organization itself. And for that, the CEB, the Chief Executive's Board for Coordination of the UN, that brings together our existing agencies, it would include the AI agency if it's established and when it's established, they have decided on some principles on how to use AI themselves. And so I'm starting from the very narrow within the UN. And they have these principles that they borrowed basically from the UNESCO principles on ethical use of AI, which is a recommendation. It was passed by the General Conference of UNESCO in 2021. And it's like, do no harm, be able to explain explainability of how this works and what it could do, respect laws like international law, things like that, transparency in its creation and its functioning. There are like 10 principles like that. And there are also some norms about human rights and respect of life also included. That reminds me of, was it Isaac Asimov, I know the laws of robotics, right? How you, again, science fiction, but becoming very real today, how can you implant in a machine the 10 commandments in a way? But the first one is thou shalt not kill, right? And how do you do that for a machine? It could be those narrow AIs, that one of them is exactly that. That's what Jay said before. I mean, I don't know if there are other ways. As UN, we would have, I'm no longer with the UN, but I say we because I believe it. I think the UN is more than those who get paid by the UN on an hour and daily basis. It's everybody, ideally. So if you could put in the conscience of this AI that thou shalt help achieve the SDGs as soon as possible, all SDGs, right? In addition to the negative ones, don't kill, etc. Now that would be very good, goes beyond doing no harm. So then we have this advisory body. The report was issued like 2 days ago, and I managed to get a copy and not read every word of it myself, but I know they had 7 recommendations, and we can go through them, but only 3 or 3.5 of them have been adopted.
How do we tell our members how to get a copy of that?
Okay, yes.
You want to hold it up 1 minute?
Sure.
Yeah.
It's reversed.
Governance.
It will show.
It will show well for them.
Yeah, okay.
So yes, Governing AI for Humanity is the title of the report. The author is the United Nations and the advisory body on AI of the UN. And if you Google AI advisory body UN report, you will get it.
Yes,
Yes.
thank you.
Sure. So if you want to see them here, the reports are in boxes, and the first one of them is what Jay said, a scientific panel like the IPCC, International Scientific Panel, which would not create the science, but right that for IPCC, so the IPCC for climate does not create its own science, but reviews all the science that's written about climate. It would be a multi-stakeholder. People represent scientists, but coming from all walks of life, from countries, from companies, etc., academia. And that would advise, of course, governments and everybody. Then we have a policy dialogue on AI governance. That is what Jay said, every 6 months. Now, I think in the global digital compact, they don't specify the frequency. They say on the sidelines of other events of the UN, just have meetings of this policy dialogue on AI governance. And there review the reports of the panel, of the expert panel, etc., of the scientific panel. Then have AI standards exchange, create an exchange where the various standard setting organizations come together, from ISO to national organizations, etc., international organizations and ITU, to set together the standards of AI. Various levels of AI, right? To debate and evaluate the standards and the processes and identify gaps and do something about them. Then you need a capacity development network. They say this goes back to the developing countries because you want them, more people to be aware, to use and even create AI. So the recommendation is the UN uses its training centers for other things, for development, etc., to include AI, can have AI training centers there and connect other centers to have educational opportunities on AI for especially developing countries. And to help that, you create also a global fund for AI, where contributions from governments, companies, philanthropy help run the previous business, especially the training, the capacity building of the developing countries. And a global AI data framework. How do you, we've been talking about this interoperability of data, also, yes, ownership of data, quality of data. It's a big question, but of course it's more about narrow AI than general AI, right? Because the other one can create its own data, go beyond and think. This one now, at this stage, people put a lot of emphasis on the value of data and who owns the data and why do others can use my data like Facebook and everybody else and train their models, AI models, and I cannot benefit from that, or I can have no control over it. Of course, Meta will tell me you're using Facebook for free for so many years and you've not even clicked on any advertisement. So anyway, there are big discussions. But what about data of other kinds, like in farming, traditional knowledge of farming and medicine and all this, which are data that can be really money-making afterwards. So this global AI data framework should be negotiated somehow, and an office within the Secretariat. Finished, I think there.
No, you're okay.
I'm okay. So AI office with the Secretariat to support all these functions of the UN and bring together the stakeholders. And they suggest that this be placed close to the Secretary General. It's of such importance that it should be close to the head of the UN. So, yeah, I mean, these have been partly adopted, as I said, yes, to the international scientific panel and to training capacity and exchange of data, standards, etc., but not clear about the money. They don't say create a fund, not clear about the office of the Secretary General, he could create it if he wants to. Not the same frequency for this dialogue of AI. We'll see what effect that will have when it's adopted, ideally tomorrow, together with the Pact for the Future as an annex to it. And then we'll go down dig into the details, what has been left out and what it means. So we have at the UN the intersection of digital connectivity, governance, internet governance. That's also a big issue, right? Who runs the internet and why there is this semi-NGO something that runs the internet. Which came from defense again, that started, but now it's like, I don't know how we classify the entity that runs the internet and the associated organizations. So they don't want the UN to have a central role as, because it's bureaucratic, okay, I understand that, because it is different kinds of regimes. They're not all liberal democracies, they're not all Westerners, they're not all thinking the same way, and could be used for authoritarian reasons, partly also understandable, but at the same time, because modern actors that are non-state actors have so much power through the money that they have, but also the control that they exercise through their technologies, that they don't want to be subject to some scrutiny necessarily by states or diplomats or whatever. So we have these pending things about governance of the internet, and how do we jump to more governance of AI now? Not sure. And of course, bridging the digital divide, the ITU, UNICEF, they're trying to have at least internet in all schools in the world. And it's in a work in progress. And as I said before, there was no technology assessment really about all this, which direction this is taking. There is no rational development of this. And I don't know if there can be at this stage a discussion like freeze, and we'll go in this direction or the other direction. We can control this, but not that. The Club of Rome told us about the limits to growth in the past, right? I don't know. Can you tell us now about the limits of AI advancement, or is it limitless? And you agree?
That's interesting.
But the limits to resources are still there, and AI needs a lot of resources. We don't know where we're going, and we should be working also from the nuclear scientists to medical doctors and others, to see all potential repercussions of this. And hopefully the UN will be a place where this discussion takes place, but how soon can it be done? Thanks.
Thank you. I'll give Jerry, who's knowing it a bit there, the first question to you, although I have several questions myself, because I've worked with different groups at the UN, World Bank and FAO, UNDP, UNEP, who all, well, I won't ask my question. I'll give it to Jerry, and then I'll ask my question.
Yeah, a pretty party report. Vernon was given the first draft to make comments on it. And I said at the time that this is actually a very good
Does
report.
Jerry
It
need
was
to talk into a microphone?
10 years ago. Sort of said what I said, but one of the things I would add into, like, who's doing what on it? And I said there's a variety of different approaches. One I didn't mention, because you didn't bring up Elon Musk, and I should have commented on that. Because one of the theses in the book I wrote 30 years ago called Fisher Fight was that you can't beat them. And Elon Musk, one approach, I mean, it's not the only, but it's one approach where you're actually wiring your brain into these cyberspaces. So the idea would be, just as I talk to you on a telephone, we say we're talking to each other. The fact is, we're not talking machine, but we say talking. We get over the idea of a technology. Imagine civilization with the AGI permeating and the advanced contact lenses, whether it's rain or whatever,
Yes.
that the distinction between technology and consciousness becomes a continuum.
Harari, Homo Deus. Have you read that?
Yeah, well, yeah, but I wrote it in the eight, I started in late 76.
Which one? Yours, yeah.
And I didn't finish publishing it until the 80s, but nevertheless, 76. Now, sort of, I guess one of the questions to you is, do you think that this can get a 2.0 version? This is okay, that's okay, that's round one. It's a good idea. Now we gotta do round two. What's the transition from here to there?
Right. This advisory body has been asked to continue to disseminate the conclusions of its report and recommendations. So I don't know if it will be reconvened as such to produce the 2.0 and whether we would like the same composition. As you said, there are not too many scientists there, perhaps. Or
No, there's scientists there.
yes,
But I'm talking about people who are not simply talking about disadvantage,
right.
but people who actually know the different approaches to AGI in play now. That's what's got to be there. Not simply how do we make sure that people who are hemiplegics can get access to robots.
Yeah, that's the way.
It's just
Representativeness, of course, yes, you're right. So you don't want only social scientists who will see the problems or try to think about, but those who actually create the technology. And yeah,
that's why our phase one just did the AGI experts. Phase two didn't. Phase two didn't connect lawyers. So
yes.
phase one, you got to get to. You'll stop. What we do about it. You'll stop.
So when we start,
We'll recommend the Secretary General. This policy forum, sorry, just to conclude that. Yeah, this policy forum can recommend it. I mean, there are ways of going. It's not the end of it. And the more we realize the importance, yeah, the more will be done.
yeah, I step back a little bit, the idea of what is the potential role of the UN. It comes immediately, I'm thinking, why doesn't why doesn't the Geneva Convention work? And we have almost universal buy-in to the Geneva Convention. We have added things to it to make it safer, to try and stop various kinds of harms that we are able to get in early and try and do. So what can we do that makes the control of AI and the diminishment of the misuse of AI any more effective than what the Geneva Convention is now trying to do for war?
Can I follow up? Yes, actually. So after hearing both of you, and I should say I'm a plant scientist and an applied plant scientist at that. But it seems like if there was to be an intervention, the only point of intervention could be at the hardware level, because the software is taught and can be done anywhere, putting code on very old computers. And I think, so I guess my question is two tiers. One is that direction where the UN should go in regulating hardware, and if it does, how do you then tell apart how will you use to bring AI, the regular AI, to underprivileged people, and make sure it's not then used somehow outside to use AGI?
Yes, of course. I mean, the plug is hardware, right? If you really want to give somebody a license to apply, that would be, yeah, the hardware. The other one, I don't know if it's controllable, meaning to even defense systems and others cannot separate their networks. You have like one running for AI, narrow, and the other. So I think that's probably a lost war already, my understanding of it. But when if you have a convention and they leave it open here, often the technology companies, they don't want anything binding, right? They want recommendations, and the UNESCO ethical use of AI principles are a recommendation. It says it. It's that recommendation of the principle shape. So if you have a binding convention, something changes. It does not stop genocide from happening or crimes of war. If it is this kind of convention, sure. Unfortunately, but at least you can go to the court, you can have a court of public opinion of some sort, you can have some, let's say, foothold to do something. I think eventually we may have a convention, right? I think so. Well, it will be developed through this forum, but also the public sector doesn't have the best scientists now. I don't know, perhaps the defense. Yes, defense, because the money is unlimited almost there, right? And also perhaps because people still believe in something. And they are motivated by both money and national interest or whatever. For me, the UN is very motivating. If I'm a mechanical engineer, I don't work like it, but I understand some of the technical things. Or international relations, but I don't know if there were an IT person or AI person who would be motivated by the common good so much, and the UN could pay a bit more than the regular salaries. I mean, you could have a team also there who could test all those systems, what you said about testing, like cars, crash tests and other things, test this before they come out to the full internet, and then also do occasional tests from time to time in real life. I know that Canada, for example, has hired a company who are their guardrails, and they do this testing of new systems as they come out. And then, they choose occasionally get those tests. The UN could do it, but there is no such capacity, I think, in-house, and cannot be competing with the Defense Department of the US or China or Russia.
And they get certified.
They get certified.
Like as I said, the testing, that's a national licensing procedure.
Right.
But the UN can say, we can check it to say, does it do A, B, and C?
The standards of the
Yes.
testing, yes.
Does it do, no, you gotta do it before we certify it. That.
That can do, yes. And ITU and others have such standards, like the National Communications Union.
Right.
Or broadband and other things, there are common standards. Yeah. True.
The rest of my question was that there are so many large-scale agencies within the UN umbrella, such as FAO, Food and basically Fisheries Organization, and UNDP and United Nations Environment Program, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, who, let alone the World Bank, who make huge summaries of data like IPCC has done in terms of climate change. They do in terms of agriculture, this or that, or fisheries, this or that, or environment.
Biodiversity,
that.
basically, another one.
And it seems to me that AI could be of enormous help, but they're going to need, if they put out a UN bibliography or set of citations, they're going to need some quality control, that this isn't just bogus or trolled like ghost like publication, but this is indeed a good publication. And the virtue of the UN doing it is that there are many publications going on in Asian languages, in Spanish and so forth, which need to be completely, for the methodology, completely translated. And this could be of enormous help to the agriculturalists, to the environmentalists, to the whoever it is who's trying to meet one of the sustainable goals by taking best technology.
Yeah.
Which would
But-
be a live system, because every week, I mean, you get these little podcast guys. This has been an amazing week. Do you know what happened this week? Every week they're saying the same damn thing. Every week it's been. So it would have to be a live document, constantly updated all
Updated with.
Yes, it's gonna have to have some control. It's gonna have to have some regulation, even within the UN system. For the UN system, for the equity and the sustainability and the other things you say. I can give you some examples of people who have mistaken my own data and thrown it in there, and people in wildly different places quote that bad data And it should have been eliminated from the system a long time ago.
Yeah.
But the same thing happens, I'm sure, in all these other fields, and we don't want a bunch of bad data coming in. That says nothing about the bad guys who, for instance, Jeff Bezos just put up a challenge, a grand challenge, where he would take AI and ask that people in AI would partner with people in climate change and make a big multi-million-dollar project out of speeding up the climate change solutions by AI. All right, well, the bad guys can do that by saying, okay, we have AI, we have child pornography, or we have women trafficking, sex trade. And how do we put those two together to make it much more efficient,
Yes, for
and
their own
much
purposes.
more financially
Yes.
equitable for those who do the thing, you see?
Yeah.
So they're thinking of the things, the bad guys are thinking of the
course.
things too. But we have two cases, some balance and evaluation at the UN aid, and then we have the getting rid of the bad guys out of the loop or out of the circle, the way they're in the internet circle.
Yeah, that's another thing. We are going to more parallel worlds also. If we have separate AI systems, etc., some gave rise to this. Like we have now the dark internet, right? It's somewhere there in the internet. But if we don't have some kind of coordination and standards at the UN or global level, then we could have a Chinese or Asian kind of standards and even internet. At some point, Russia cut off its internet, I think, because they were afraid of how it could be used to infiltrate them or to cut them off, and then they wouldn't have their services. So they cut off themselves from the internet, the global internet, and they saw how they could perform the standard functions, their intranet, whatever you want to call it, their part of the internet. So, I mean, there are many struggles here. You want to have one internet and one perhaps AI set of standards, but if we don't manage that, we may have competing ones. And that is also even more ungovernable probably at world level. But also we have this thing of money being used by mafia guys, the bad guys, by crazy guys, perhaps. I don't know how you would feel, some super scientists or super rich people, right? And then by governments also that can have more extreme or not positions in terms of the elimination of their opponents. And plus, on top of all this, if AI worked for everybody well, and it helped us take care of ourselves in a peaceful environment, what would be the purpose of life? I mean, would we need jobs? Do you really need a job to be a human? Do you need to do anything? Do you need to cook to be a human? If your food is cooked and everything is provided by AI, are you still human? What's your purpose? I mean, it leads to many, many questions. Not that we're there yet. But,
Ryan, do you
just to
have a
confuse you more.
No, I will deal with those in my own.
Brian Jackson, who is the director of the Caribbean Medical School in Curacao, and who has a long distinguished career in teaching medicine and in international humanitarian aid to medicine. He, in 2010, during the Haitian crisis of the earthquake, went to Haiti and headed up a series of physicians and prosthetics and nurses and other medical people going to aid the Haitian people, which was extremely strenuous and extremely helpful. And that's how he and I came into contact first. But Ryan is a full member of the International Club, and he sits on the membership committee, as well as being on the board and past president of the USA Club of Rome. And he's going to handle some of the uses and the future thoughts about AI and medicine.
So it's good to see everybody. I'm following some leaders in the field of AI policy with Jerome Glenn and Georgios Kostakos. And I'm just a physician and educator, so I will try my best. Right? When we're speaking about artificial intelligence, whether we mean the general intelligence or the artificial narrow intelligence, which exists now, or the super intelligence, which may exist in the future, people have often split it between the extremes. Are we supposed to be terrified of this, or are we supposed to worship this as the latest God? Neither. Okay. This should be used as a tool, and with the safety guidelines. We need to help set the policies as this is developing. And we have to understand that its reality is what we make of it. So whether we look at it as the allegory of the cave that Plato used, you know, if you're only shown a shadow of reality, will you know what reality really is? Or look at it from the perspective of the Matrix. You can't trust any of your senses if all of those senses are fed the wrong information. So if we feed the narrow intelligence or the general intelligence bad information, it will come to bad conclusions. And so some people have thought that by just having vast amounts of information, that it will somehow become more ethical than the people who created that information. I think that's a little naive, okay? There's the two main ways of developing this are the large language models, which is essentially brute force, just feeding everything in and hoping that eventually this will become something useful. Or developing a more focused neural net type of natural learning. And I don't know if that will actually happen, but I see great prospects in that in the future. But regardless, it's what we feed it. It's what we expose it to. So some of the narrow intelligence models at the moment have been coming up with racist and biased information because that's what it's scraping out of the internet. It's seeing racism, it's seeing hate, it's seeing ignorance, it's saying inject yourself with bleach to cure diseases. And so do we want that involved in medical decisions and ethical decisions without kind of cleansing what's being fed to it? So if we're going to use this for medicine, as it's already being used in limited artificial narrow intelligence senses, like all of the scanners, the CT, MRI, all of those already have diagnostic functions. But as is done with those, there's a physician involved in the process. So that MRI doesn't communicate directly to the patient and diagnose them. There's a physician doing a reality check. Any tool that we have to have enough actual intelligence and knowledge to see if it's giving us a reasonable result. If we're doing a basic equation on a calculator and we get an answer that's off by orders of magnitude, do we have enough knowledge of the mathematics to know if that is a ridiculous answer? If we're being told to inject the patient with awful poisons, do we know enough about the human physiology to know that these are awful poisons? Are we going to be injecting bleach in our patients? So this is where we need to have the reality check in. Just as we would with controlling nuclear weapons, hopefully we have the reality check there. There were many potential escalations during the Cold War where a single individual prevented complete annihilation of the human race. I want to make sure that as we're developing these models, regardless of how narrow they are or how general they are, that we have a human presence with the knowledge and the ethics to determine how this will go. So we also, that's where we go between the tool versus a free agent. We should have guided agents if we have given agency at all. We shouldn't allow it to just go off and decide what its values are. And as we're teaching it medicine, we needed to understand the context of the ethical dilemmas. Because too often in medicine, humans have made the mistake of justifying atrocities based on utilitarianism, an ethical principle. So why can't we just do what's best for society? Well, we have done that. And we've had the Nuremberg trials because of things like that. We've had many experiences that we have to teach physicians from, where these things did not work. How do you teach that kind of context to a computer? And that's where, as we're feeding in more information, as we're guiding it, it's a natural learning model with an artificial general intelligence. How can we guide it through that ethical instruction so that it can understand humanity? And these have huge possibilities to help, or they could cause chaos. And that's why Jerome and Georgios have been helping to set up some of the framework for these guidelines. And in medicine, especially, we need to make sure that the sources that we're using are peer-reviewed and ethically peer-reviewed, because there are peer-reviewed journals that aren't ethical. For a price, they'll publish anything. And we also need to teach it about retractions. Because is it using a retracted article that was retracted for good reason? Is it using an article that should have been retracted? Does it know the difference? And so the artificial intelligence, whether narrow or general, has the advantage that it can multitask and it can absorb vast amounts of information beyond what we are capable of. And it can make connections and extrapolations that are incredible. So as we're learning from some of these, some of the earlier narrow intelligence models have been designing new possible therapeutic drugs based on the structures. So they're looking at what works, which enzymes, which molecules are used in our body, and extrapolating what might work in the future to do a similar function and avoid things like drug-resistant antibiotics, drug-resistant infections, so we can have a better use. But along those same lines, people who are bad actors can use these same models to design the perfect weapon. So poisons that can't be counteracted, new viruses that will spread incredibly rapidly. So that's where we set in these guidelines. Don't let it act on its own, and make sure that the people who are using it have some regulations with them. Now, there will be the criminal element. No matter what, there's going to be people using these things for evil. So right now we have the generative AI through ChatGPT or similar versions, which are able to create lifelike images. So we have the deep fake videos of politicians, celebrities, and I think just as harmful or more so, they're doing the realistic nudes of teenagers and children, so that these people are just starting out in life and they already have graphic images of themselves that are becoming less and less distinguishable from fakes. And then we have the other problem, going back to the topic of what you put into it, the garbage in, garbage out. Now, some of these large language models are running into information that was created by other large language models. And so you're recycling the same information and you're getting less and less accurate versions of reality. Because again, reality is what it perceives. And if it's finding this stuff in the same locations as what was generated by humans in the past, it will think that that is just as real. And does it understand satire? Some humans apparently do not either. Okay. I'm seeing a lot of articles shared that they don't see the tiny little watermark that says that it's satire. So years ago, there were 2 newspapers in India that were using articles from US news sources, and they didn't know about the Onion. So they shared articles from the Onion, including one saying that one of the men who had landed on the moon had been convinced by the conspiracy theorists that he actually hadn't been there. So that spread through what was supposed to be a legitimate news source from a satirical news source. Okay. Does the AI model understand that? And are we going to flag anything as it's learning, to help it see where these lines of reality end? Okay. So we should neither be terrified nor worship these. We need to grow and develop with them and help set the guidelines as we would with our children. Help guide it towards the best information, help learn from it as it reaches new milestones, as it develops new treatments, as it does new things. Because it's already performed better in some of these tasks that we thought that it couldn't. A recent study showed that users chatting with a virtual physician found that the virtual physician was more empathetic. Okay. Now, take that with a grain of salt. People consider somebody who spends more time with them more empathetic. And the AI doesn't have a time limit. They don't have to see the next patient. They don't have to get compensated for their time and be able to justify it on their billing. But that is something that just a year ago, they didn't think would have been possible. Now, there's going to be a lot of other areas where it will be much better than the human physician, as long as there's a human guideline, as human safety net. So we have the self-driving cars. Waymo, with their self-driving cars, still has a human watching remotely and helping it around obstacles. And then we have others that are trying to be fully autonomous, ramming into individuals and parked cars and things like that. So human safety nets, essential, whether we're talking about dealing with human medicine or driving cars or nuclear weapons. Regardless, I want to have that human safety net, and that human has to have the intellect and the ethical foundation to know what he's doing. Because that is the bottleneck. Okay, so we need to develop.
You can't program people properly.
Yes, we do need to.
Education system.
I think there are a few people that need some reprogramming and guidance through finding out what satire means, finding out what news sources are, and what peer review actually means. So there's a lot of different parts there. But in summary, don't fear, don't worship. Put some guidelines in, and let's work on this with large groups as it's being done finally. So the United Nations and many countries are finally looking at the importance of setting these guidelines and setting rules and acknowledging that artificial general intelligence could be in the near future. So we have to prepare for it. And whether or not that artificial general intelligence turns into artificial superintelligence. Well, first we have to deal with how to handle a general intelligence. We may never know how to deal with a superintelligence. And let's start where we can. Let's start now. But do not give these models free rein to be agents without any human interaction checking their advances. Any questions, comments?
You're suggesting that there be differential guardrails for different disciplines rather than one set of guardrails? I'm a little unclear.
So there are general guardrails that should be in place for all of this. And one of the general ones is no interaction with human well-being should be taken by any AI without human intervention. So if it affects human well-being, whether by trying to resolve a global crisis like climate change, we can't have it unilaterally deciding that, oh, we're just going to stop all factories or stop all power plants, because that would be one way to stop pollution. We need to have a human being involved in that process to say, hey, slow down. Let's think about this. Let's decide how to do this properly. Okay, so use it as a tool. Don't have it dictating to you. So that's across all fields. Then within each field, then you need the experts in that field to be able to formulate what is relevant to that specific field. So in medicine, you need to know what is actual science-based medicine versus rumors online, anecdotal data that hasn't been supported by any evidence, that kind of thing. And then that kind of thing would apply to environmental science, that would apply to chemistry, virology, nearly any field that could be benefited. Then we need to have those experts involved. So
how do you program a computer to deal with multivariate values, which have to be interrelated?
You wait. Get different ways.
yeah. So
And even the weighting system doesn't have to be general. So
Yeah.
any system can be contingent upon another system on the weighting system.
Okay, and therefore you can take it several stages.
Yeah.
And validation is critical.
Yeah, now let me argue against what I just said.
So this is Jerome Glenn. He's not on camera right now, but he's commenting about the weighting of the different
And Ted
variables.
Manning as the original
And
question.
Ted Manning, I'll turn it to Jerome so he can add to this.
Now, here's where I argue against what I just said. I mean,
Okay.
yes, the weighting is the answer. And the subunits of the weighting and the weighting is tearing it down. Yes, that's the answer. But here's why it's not a multiple answer. Let's say you have let's say you're doing a robot car. And a robot car is programmed that if there's going to be an accident and somebody's going to be killed, the old person gets killed first, the young people gets killed last. Most cultures in the world would say, okay, we don't like it, but yeah, we accept that. But then you also may have in there saying, well, if it's going to be a large number of people killed versus a small number. So along comes this robot car, and it's in an emergency situation, an accident. And if it goes this way, it kills one child that's 3 years old. If it goes this way, it kills 20 people that are over 80 years old.
Yeah.
What does it do?
Instead, it goes between them and kills the dog.
No way.
Yeah. It's all that, it's all down.
That's why I'm saying, the weight of the subunits or something. This is why that one guy I mentioned how he used to throw up his hands. He said, you have no idea how complex this is.
So, yeah, thank you. So the AI will come up with a solution to the trolley problem, but will it be the solution that a human would have come up with? Yes, Georgia.
Hi, how are you? I'm good. Good to see you.
Oops. Could you mute yourselves? Whoever's speaking.
UNESCO, with its principles, also tries to implement them in each of the disciplines of the environment. I'm saying that UNESCO, together with the recommendations of the principles, they also have by area of activity specific application of those principles. So for education, for example, how not to over burden a kid with contact with AI only, like the socialization, or not to follow kids. You know, retina is something you can tell somebody if somebody's getting the information, but that is really an invasion of privacy and all that. So for each field, there are already applications for this, right?
Yeah. Well, and there's a lot of different things with that. I'll turn it back to me. So as we're feeding it the data, where do we get the data? Okay. Is it ethically sourced? Because at some point, if it reaches artificial general intelligence, it may be able to get through all of the firewalls and into confidential data. So is it going to be getting the general information through confidential patient records? And then are those patient records accurate? Because those were created by nurses, nurses' aides, physicians. There's so many different levels. Do they know how to weight the different ones? Do they know if there's hospitals that have a worse record on keeping those records? All of those things. So as we develop a more intelligent model, whether through the brute force of large language models or through a more elegant model of, like a neural network type of learning, will that end up learning a better way to weight these things than we know? That would be ideal, because then, we can show it the general pattern, and then it can extrapolate beyond where we're at. And then we won't have to be doing this job anymore. But I don't want to ever get to the point where we stop reality checks. Okay. We need this. When I'm talking with my students, I want them to be able to have a general idea of the calculation, so that if their computer tells them the wrong number, they're not going to kill a patient. If it tells them the wrong drug interaction, then they need to be able to know if that's realistic. Because there's so many drug interactions. You look at the cytochrome P450 system and how that interacts with all these different drugs. Then you look at all of these other different ways that they can interact with each other, with your physiology. It can track those things better than we can. But if we come to the point where we're entirely dependent on it to check these things, then we can get to the point where we're complacent and lazy, and we won't do the thinking for ourselves. And so if it tells us to give 2 drugs that have a deadly interaction, then we won't know enough to stop that from happening. So we still need to learn the information. We still need to know history. We need to know the ethical issues that we've had in the past, so we don't repeat those. We need to know about the human physiology, even if ChatGPT already knows it better than we do. Because while it can pass the medical licensing exam now, it doesn't understand what the human body really is. Because it is fed a huge amount of data, but it doesn't actually know what we are. Yes.
That brings up another thing I didn't mention about it before. I talked about the monitoring system and the auditing system. You can get a license or a medical diagnostics system, and there's a point at which you say, okay, it's a legitimate thing. However, what I'm doing in the general is that after that, you also have 24 hours, 7 days of constant monitoring. So you don't really audit and then you're okay. You have an auditing system that's on all the time, and that the system itself is a collective intelligence system that is learning itself because a new medical diagnostic approach may come out the next day. That if you didn't do that, it wouldn't happen. So you'd have to have an automatic sort of thing. That's one point. The second one, what we were talking about before we started, is that one of the new trends is for small startups, not the Microsoft, the small startups, to say, okay, I'm going to make a deal with all the medical journals in the world. And I'm going to pay whatever about it, and then boom, we have a language model, all for peer-reviewed medical journals, period, nothing else but that. And these specialty AI is going to start seeing popping up this the end of this year and next year, and that addresses a little bit the artificial stuff. Now, but here back to the artificial part is that because large companies don't want to pay royalties to the New York Times and the rest of the people, where they're going to get around it is that they're going to have enough generated stuff that starts to replace the actual New York Times stuff. So you end up with the synthetic knowledge being the database because they don't want to pay the money for the royalties.
Yeah. It's a complicated issue because in the end, we need to make sure that we feed the right data in. Like in any of these predictive models that people have for the futures or for anything else, you need that to be clean data that is going to be effective and useful, and not throw a wrench in the works so that you completely disable everything else that is nice and neat. So there's a lot of ways to go through that, and actually some of the AI things have been programmed to screen for manufactured data. And they found that a lot of scientific studies, the data tables have been altered, and they can look for certain patterns. There's certain numbers that people choose more often than others when they're making them up.
Right. One of the guidelines we had is that you're not allowed to change history. And that a narrow AI that once that begins to occur, it's caught right there. And if you've got the flight recorder, you can say how it happened.
Right.
So the trouble is these things all interrelate. It's not like one deal. It's a complex web.
Yeah, it's a compliment, like they're trying to get the real language for the not make stuff up. It's going back to the user is back to us. It has to put an answer, it's going to give you the answer. You don't have to find the question it says.
Yeah, that's why I was saying because they don't want to pay the royalties. Made up stuff, they're going to pay more than the past.
Or at some point, they may just bypass the firewall and get into those articles for free. So there's a lot of different approaches, not the most ethical ones. And that hasn't held anybody back in the past as we're developing things. So
and that's where the UN comes in, because I can put out San Diego and break all the rules, right? So you want San Diego to sign on to that UN convention.
But then also many of the peer-reviewed journals have been unethical in how they handle things, because while their product is produced by people who aren't compensated for their work, they're charging exorbitant amounts so that some of the poorer institutions can't afford them.
Yeah, there's one thing we should support. You still need your professional societies. Like the AMA, it's got a responsibility here.
Right. And so there's many stakeholders that have to be on board as we're going through these things and making these decisions. If the AMA and the New England Journal of Medicine and so many of these others want clean data in the AI model, then they're going to have to provide some at lower cost or no cost, because they will get a benefit in the end, and a benefit to society.
And these young startup companies I just mentioned, it'll be in their financial interest to be certified by whatever professional entity they're going to pay for.
Certification is
So,
actually
we-
okay.
Okay,
Certified AI.
Yeah, where else would you go other than the AMA stuff?
Well,
World Health Organization.
yeah,
So that's political as well as.
and the AMA has their own problems with their journals. There's some of the quality has been lagging on certain topics. So because many journals have gotten political rather than focusing on the pure science.
Yeah, there's been progress, by the way, as you know, on identifying lying. And I can see, just like you have in some FBI tests, a lie detector, I could be interesting to see if that gets into like professional societies to make sure they're not, not lying.
Yeah, but most of those tools don't factor into their formulas, the sociopaths. Because the sociopaths won't have the physiologic changes while they're lying. They have no emotional response.
Something else, I'd love to read that.
Yeah, so it's they've had sociopaths beat the lie detector tests, and then there's also the ways where you create a false baseline. So one of the Ocean's 11 movies, they had the guy with a thumbtack in his shoe. So he created a baseline where all of his heart rate and blood pressure were off the charts. So then lying didn't register. So it's, you can create a false baseline, or you can be a sociopath and just steady as anything. So
I was looking at this as a social scientist. I was one of the directors of the Canadian Social Science Association. It all comes down to trust, quite frankly, and we all can define ways in which trust can be measured, managed, analyzed, and probably not believed. And that's been
You got the information boards here. All
exactly. So really fundamentally, I'm standing back and saying, look, these guys know a lot about where artificial intelligence can go and may lead us to, but we are still looking, as we say, for governance or for guardrails. We've been looking for that all through academia for a long time, and particularly in the political science area, where we're still not able to do any measuring as far as we can tell. But the whole issue is really, how do we create enough trust so that people will begin to use it in the ways that it's beneficial, and not, as we're saying now, how afraid we are of what could be done wrong.
I need to say thanks.
So, quite frankly, we are going to thank you all for coming. And I hope that Ryan has the recording, because his computer cut mine off at one particular point. That said, we'll try and make sure that we get all of this back to everyone. And we know everybody who is, a lot of people have said they want to watch later. They can't make it now. So we do have a lot of people who are seriously interested in this. It's just that we are going head to head with an awful lot of other organizations and interesting things. So thank you all very much. The presentations, as I see them, at least, I hope you do, were superb. And I hope we will get a chance to do this again one day.
Yes, and thank you, Ryan, for a most successful.
Yeah.
Reminder that we need guardrails. We need guardrails for human health, among other things. And I want to thank everybody who's helped put the morning session together, particularly Jerry Glenn and Georgios Kostakos, Ryan Jackson, but also Jerome Glenn, Ted Manning, Marilyn, wherever you are out there in cyberspace. And we want to thank the USACORP and KCOR boards for co-sponsoring this, and also tell all of our people online and here that we're going to break for lunch until 12:45, at which point we will open again on the same link